We are joined now by Stephen Barrett, coach and sports scientist with the AG Tour La Mondiale team. Stephen, you're very welcome to the show. How are you getting on?
Good on. Thanks very much for having me. It's no, it's good. Good to be on. Good to be on.
So you obviously know Sam quite well. How much was yesterday an ambition for him for, I guess, the last couple of years, even when he wasn't riding in the Tour?
I mean, for any cyclist, especially sprint cyclists, something like Sam, the ultimate goal is to win a stage Tour de France. That's what it is, and you can go and do the Giro d'Italia, Vuelta a España. You can win some one-day races, but to be at the pinnacle of your sport is the Tour de France, and that's where you're gauged on in terms of when people look back over how successful your career was, how many stages of the Tour de France have you won. So in terms of his overall ambitions, that was, I'd say, number one since he was a small kid growing up in Carrick.
Because it was as emotional a post-race interview as you're ever likely to see. It is one of those moments that does, as Ger was saying earlier on, it kind of transcends the cycling community that are watching the race every day. It suddenly becomes a very wide Irish thing yesterday where everybody is suddenly overjoyed for this guy, even though they might not have watched him over the last couple of years, even though they might not have watched him claim green last week even. This is a really huge moment for Sam in terms of the Irish public consciousness, I feel.
I mean, for sure. I mean, I think anybody who watched the interview after the stage yesterday, we kind of broke down those barriers of these professional athletes being some sort of these kind of robotic-like figures, and you just saw the emotion that just it kind of started to flood out of them, and it was so nice to see because we've all been accustomed to post-game, post-race interviews, and they're quite choreographed. But with Sam, that was Sam. He was a guy who's put in so much work the last few years, and his last time in the Tour de France in 2016, it didn't go so good. He had to drag himself around France for 3 weeks. So the level of emotion once you cross that finish line and he realizes he's won, it's almost too much to handle, and he just broke down. It was so nice to see that, okay, this guy is this means so much to him and the work he's put into it.
Yeah, we were talking about this on the show last week. Actually, that 2016 Tour is remarkable, really. What I almost find even on a par with that is kind of what's happened the last couple of years, where this guy has clearly been good enough to race at this specific level, but never really got the opportunity as a teammate of Peter Sagan. As somebody who works in the Tour de France every year, works with professional cyclists, did you kind of think to yourself this move just had to happen for Sam? He had to get out of Sagan's shadow and he had to almost leave Bora.
It's true. I mean, I remember I spoke to Sam last year in the Tour, or just before the Tour, where he was with Bora. And when you're in a team like Bora and you've got Peter Sagan, I mean, look, it is what it is. Peter Sagan is box office. He is the Neymar. He's the Ronaldo of cycling. Everybody wants to, interview him. Everyone wants to be with him. So, and Peter Sagan and Sam have the same attributes. So for Bora, you've got 8 guys in the Tour de France, and their objective every year is for Sagan. And for Sam to come in, it just wasn't going to work. And even with Bora the last few years, they had different sprinters past Lackerman, and Sam was like, okay, Sam, you can go and do the Vuelta a España. Now, the Vuelta a España is a big race, but for Sam, the pinnacle is the Tour. And I mean, Sam has been in that team since 2015. I think Sagan joined in 2017. So, I mean, and Sagan has pretty much won the green jersey every year since. So for Sam to make that big step across to the Kony Quick Step, which is a big team with big ambitions. They have Julian Alaphilippe in the team, who's a yellow jersey contender. And not only to make the step across, but then to show his level of form to be selected for the Tour de France also is a big thing. So for him, his career, I mean, it was a perfect move, and it's a perfect team that he can go and show his ability, really, which is something that he wasn't able to do the last few years.
And this is the key thing to underline, I think, from yesterday. You're talking about Peter Sagan being the Ronaldo or the Neymar of cycling. Sam Bennett is as good as him. Maybe Sagan is slightly better, but at this specific point, of course Sagan's career will be a more illustrious thing, but at this specific point, we are looking at Sam Bennett going toe-to-toe with the Ronaldo/Neymar of cycling and winning.
100%. And this is something that I think it's nice for people to realise that. I think yesterday was a prime example. Okay, it was a super stressful day, but in the final, in the sprint, it was a drag race, and it was Sagan versus Sam versus Caleb, who are arguably the three fastest guys in the world the last few years, and Sam won heads up. And he won actually, I won't say easy, but from a sprinter's point of view, he won pretty easy. And the fact Sam is going to come out of the shadow of Sagan, in the last few years, and he's raised his game against once more. Like this is not okay. Some of the guys are missing. Like these are the fastest guys in the world are at that race yesterday, and like I said, Sam is. And even go back to the stage one, it looks like Sam is probably the fastest guy in the world at the moment in terms of sprinting, which is awesome to see from an Irish point of view.
Stephen, looking up his birthday to see what stage of his career is at. So he's going to be 30 in October, according to Wikipedia. And that's like a great age for a sprinter, right? You can continue to be at this level for 3 or 4 more seasons. And this is the bit where his crossover appeal, his post-race interview, surely is very attractive to sponsors and to teams for next season and for beyond. So this is a life-changing moment for him.
Oh, for sure. And that's the thing with cycling and with sport in general. It's a short-term gig. Once you're in the game, it's you're maybe at the top level for 3, 4, 5 years. And to make this, I think, like you alluded to beforehand, financially very good for him, because it's, the career doesn't last forever. At him, at his age now, he's 30 next month. Between the ages of 26 to 32, 33, that's when you're at your absolute prime. That's when you've got all the attributes. You've had years and years and years of racing. You've got the experience. He could be at his game, top of the game for the next 3, 4, 5 years if he wanted to be. So it is like you said. It certainly is a noted upward trajectory in his career for the next few years, which is great.
Look, people are going to know a bit about your background, but you've worked with the Waterford Hurlers in the past, and you've kind of seen team sports like this. But I guess you'll also know the benefit of winning something specific, which was clearly a burden on him in some ways, because the emotion wasn't there. We didn't see the emotion last week when he won the green jersey. I'm sure it was fairly emotional for him to get to that point, but it seemed like yesterday is some kind of big release, which again, it's just a confidence booster. It's great to get into green, and that's fine, but this seemed to be a holy grail for him. And we all know that once you're free in sport, and once you're in the zone and you have confidence and you've got all those things that are the intangibles, then who knows what's going to happen next over the next couple of weeks.
I mean, this is true, because it's like you said, he was in the green jersey last week, and we didn't see that outpouring of emotion, because you kind of get into green jersey by accumulating points, and sprinters and athletes, they crave that feeling of winning. And there's nothing can compare with what Sam did yesterday when he went shoulder to shoulder with the guys. Like I said, it was a really stressful day. It's not just a case of he was there with 500 meters to go and he sprinted. That's a whole day of left, right, around about. There was so many crashes yesterday. There was crosswinds. It was insane, and just the amount of mini pieces of stress that he experienced all over the day to go and win that race was it's incredible. So in terms of green jersey versus stage wins, if you ask Sam beforehand, for sure he says, I want to win the stage. What's good for us now as spectators is he has that box ticked from a stage win, and now he's got to kind of switch tact a little bit now in the next kind of couple of weeks, and okay, now it's time to go win a green jersey. And the cherry on the cake really is try to win a sprint on the Champs-Élysées on the last day, which again is it's the pinnacle of the Tour de France if you can win on the Champs-Élysées.
Does the sprint tend to go down to the Champs-Élysées? Obviously the GC
Always.
Doesn't. Right, okay. Sorry, I didn't realise that.
Yes. Yeah, so basically the last day is a bit of a procession. So normally like the GC will be finalised on the day before Champs-Élysées. Yeah. So the day before is the time trial. And on the last day, that's when you see people drinking champagne. They go back to the team car. They start to have some photographs. So it's the first hour is like really, like I said, you'll see guys drinking champagne and stuff, which is maybe a bit unusual. But then with about an hour and a half to go, it switches to race mode, and it's always a sprint. It's never not been a sprint. So last year, there's a few famous shots of sprinting up the Champs-Élysées. Last year, Caleb Ewan won it, but to top off a Tour de France with a win on the Champs-Élysées would be it's incredible. But it will be a sprint finish for sure on Champs-Élysées.
Is he very much firmly in pole position now, in your opinion? Obviously, as you say, from a neutral standpoint, it's great that Sagan is chasing, I'd imagine, because I'd imagine most people would still favour him. But what do you think?
It's an interesting one. He has the jersey, so he is in pole, he's in pole position to hold it. But his mentality has to change now, because in the past you win a stage, and sprinters' mentality when they go to the Alps, which is what they do. After today they go to they have a sprint stage today, but after today they go into the big mountain of the Alps. And sprinters usually survival mode. They'll go in, they'll go as easy as they can to get through the days that they just don't like. For Sam, he now needs to go into green jersey mode. And what Sagan is very, very good at doing, Sagan is very good at infiltrating breakaways on these medium mountain, high mountain days. And every day on the mountains, there's like an intermediate sprint. Which is worth 20 points. I mean, Sam's only 24, 25 points ahead of Sagan. So what Sam will do, he'll have to mark Sagan, he'll have to mark Matteo Trentin. And if those guys are being active and want to go on a breakaway on one of the mountain days, which is something that Sam would never do, he has to follow and he has to mark. And now, one thing that's good for Sam is that he's got a very, very strong team. He's got, like I said, Michael Morkov, who was the guy in front of him yesterday till 200 to go. He's a multiple world track champion. Bob Jungels, Julia Alaphilippe. So those guys will also assist Sam in making sure that Sagan doesn't get in a breakaway too easy. They'll make him work for it. So Sam's now, instead of being survival mode in the Alps, it's now green jersey mode. But he for sure has a big shout to take it all the way to Paris.
For people wondering, you're back in Ireland at the moment because your wife is expecting you. You were over in France for the start of this year's tour, I think, Stephen. So I guess you got to get a little bit of a sample of what things are like over there at the moment. It's such a massive event. It is all about the supporters. Of course, there are still some fans at the stages. Does it feel like a very alien event this year, the Tour de France?
I mean, it does a little bit. I mean, I was also there last year in Brussels, so I had a good comparison with it. And I mean, the Tour de France is the ultimate circus. It's crazy. It's insane. The amount of media and fans, which is cool. It's incredible. I mean, this year, obviously, it's a big difference. Every team have very, very strict protocols in place in how it's managed. I know in Nice last week, your fans normally would be surrounding the bus, but fans were kept away from buses. Like, for the riders' point of view, there very much is a job to do, so they don't really get affected by the lack of people at the start and at the finish. But what's going to be interesting really is in the next kind of week when we go to the Alps, how we saw it already on the Parasud in the Pyrenees the last few days, the fans on the side of the road, which is great to see. And that's what we see on the TV, Tour de France. We see these fans, and they just open up and they kind of show the road, and the riders go through with this kind of just screen of fans. Again, with the whole issue, we actually had a staff member test positive for coronavirus yesterday, and they were sent home along with a staff member from Ineos.
Right.
The rules state that if you've got two people in your team who test positive for coronavirus, the team is kicked out of the race. So every team is very, very vigilant in who they have in terms of interactions with, and that's it. The issue now we have with fans on the side of the road, being too close to riders, shouting, coughing, whatever it is. So it's something that the UCI are trying to curtail and make sure there's barriers, people wear masks and whatnot. But it's different, but it's Tour de France, so guys get on with it,
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I guess if you have one test, then it's kind of one of two strikes essentially, and that's another tightrope that needs to be walked. Just for people who aren't aware of your backstory, Stephen, I mean, Ger mentioned your hurling background, or at least working with the Waterford senior hurlers. You were with Derek McGrath, I think, or at least with the Waterford senior hurlers for 5 years. So how does one go from coaching Austin Gleeson and working with Austin Gleeson to working with Romain Bardet to win the yellow jersey?
It's a good question. I'm still asking myself how that even happened. But I'm from Cork. I've been living in Waterford since 2014, and was involved with Derek from his second year all the way through to his last year, which was great. My background is GA. I suppose how I transitioned across to cycling was I had a bit of a background racing in triathlon and in cycling, and I worked with the now infamous maybe Aqua Blue Sport team as well as a performance director. And we had some success there, and cycling is a small world. So I got contacted by the general manager of Azure Desert 2 years ago. Asked me would I come on board as a as a coach, and I was kind of like, the French team, they don't speak English, they speak no English. But it was funny, it was listening to guys like Ron Nagara and stuff, and those rugby guys who go to France and they make a career for themselves in La Rochelle or Grenoble or wherever it is. And I said, okay, it's a bit of an experience, a bit of a challenge. And I've been there now 2 years. I've just signed a new contract to stay there for another 3 years. So it's a cool opportunity for me. And like I said, we're having some success. Roman is obviously sitting 4th place in the GC, which is what it is for us. There's a French guy not won a Tour de France in so many years. We had a stage win with Nance Peters at the weekend, which was incredible for the team. But when you listen to somebody like Ron Nagara and how he's integrated into the French lifestyle, again, my wife, we moved to Nice last year, and it's I said I can come back and work in GA again at some time, but I'm going to live the French lifestyle as long as I can.
Yeah, it sounds slightly more attractive, like as attractive as Derek McGrath's backroom team does sound. Living and working in Nice sounds pretty good. How quickly do you need to, I guess, given you don't have the language immediately, how hard is that for you to actually, I guess, ingrain yourself within the team? Because it's a very information-based role that you have. Communication is very, very important.
Exactly right. And your job really kind of is based on how well you can communicate and how well you can translate information. And if you can't communicate effectively, well, kind of you're a waste of space. So even though initially I didn't have the language, a lot of the riders could see that I could bring something different that would improve their performance. So be it from a nutrition point of view, a sports science point of view, a coaching point of view, aerodynamics, so on and so forth. And one thing that I used to also lecture, and one thing that I learned with Derek in the Waterford team is how to build good relationships. I see how Derek was with different players. You mentioned Austin Gleeson, Kevin Moore and these guys. He had such a strong relationship with those guys, and anything that he said, those guys would undertake. And that's what I did almost naturally when I got to AG Tour. We had a few training camps, and I just built up those relationships with riders quite early. I still don't know how I did it, but I did it. And that's kind of made me, I suppose, a more important part of the team. But it's, you can be the smartest guy going, you can have all the PhDs and sports science knowledge, but if you can't effectively communicate with a Rowan Bardet or Oliver Nason, you're useless. So it was a challenge, but it was something that I loved, and it's something that's I'm continuing to do, which is great,
Sorry, did you say you went cycling with them and stuck with them?
No, definitely not. What you do is what I said was just you're around them, you're there, you're in the car with them when they go training, you're maybe on a scooter beside them when they go training, and you're giving them information and stuff as they do it. So I definitely didn't go and cycle with the guys and stay with them. If you look at even yesterday, no, definitely not.
That would have been amazing. I was like, okay, you have many, many talents here. In terms of coaching, like how do you coach somebody to be a better cyclist who's already done their who's in their mid-20s and he thinks they've seen everything and they know everything, and you're like, actually, have you thought about this?
You'd be surprised how many gaps there are in cycling. Cycling by its nature is quite an old school sport, and like stuff like sports science is okay. It's not new, but there's definitely new things being developed every year, and new areas that we're learning about, be it training, periodization, different training protocols and stuff. And what you do is you sit down, you speak with guys, and you just look at what they've been doing in previous years. And more often than not, they're not doing things as good as they could. They do things to a certain point where they get success. But if you tweak this and change this, well, then we can actually progress you to another level. Because I think it's like GA, and it's like any sport. I think a lot of athletes will put a certain limit on their abilities, and once they reach that limit, or what they perceive as their limit, they're happy with that. And you need to show them and teach them, okay, how you actually can break through this and move to another level. And in cycling, it's a sport which is very, very data driven. You've got power numbers, heart rate numbers, GPS numbers. It's very, very analytical, but there's a huge element of showing somebody how they can get better. And it's no different to a hurling team or a football team. When you get to a certain level, okay, how can you press on and be, instead of just being in Division 2, how can you press on and be, All Ireland contender or a Munster contender? It's the same type of conversation you have with those guys.
One of the things that I'm interested in as well is, I guess, what is going to happen if the Sam Bennett situation does actually roll on and there is this, I guess, massive public interest in Sam Bennett. Like, he's speaking in some of his quotes yesterday. What was he saying? Just from the Irish Times, he was saying that you can go on a Sunday spin in Carrick-on-Suir, and it's a small town, but you could have 80 riders. And he's talking about how there's been an upsurge in interest in the sport in Ireland. You obviously mentioned the Aqua Blue sport team there a while ago, and how perhaps that didn't work out in the end. But is there the start of something here in Irish cycling again, where there is going to be a second generation, or are we already seeing a second generation of really talented riders, world-class riders, and potentially the idea of a team based in Ireland again could be revisited?
I mean, I think so. I do know there's some conversations going on about trying to reignite a team in Ireland where you can expose younger guys to racing on the continent, because that's what you need. And something like Sam would have done when he was younger. He would have went to Belgium, would have went to France and started to race those races against such a high level. But I mean, you're right. I mean, I go out on the bike here occasionally and around Waterford, and you see groups of people on a Saturday and on a Sunday. And I think a lot of that also has come from this whole lockdown. People, got on the bikes more often. There was, people, I think people got sick of doing 5Ks and they started, okay, let's get a bike. And, I know in my local bike shops here, they had bikes sold out for months and months. So it would be nice, again, that's kind of what's nice to come on, is that Sam now has, Sam has been successful for the last few years. But what this does, the Tour de France, is it's supposed to expose them to much wider community. And it shows young people that it's possible. Because I remember watching the Tour de France on TG Carro when I was a kid and being like, that's pretty cool, but you're never going to be there. You're never going to get there. And here I am, 10 years later, working there. And Sam was the same. I remember racing Sam down in Currow in County Kerry when he was a 16-year-old. And, I'm sure he was watching Tour de France on TV and saying, that would be cool, but I don't think it's possible. So it's a case of trying to show young people that is possible. And with the right mindset and with the right people around you, you can go and you can be very, very successful in a very elite sport. I think it's going to be great for Irish cycling. You just need to capitalize on it now and get people out on the bikes more.
Yeah, and I mean, at grassroots level here, it's a participation sport immediately. It can't but be a bad thing to have it here. I'm really interested as well in when you come into the sport of cycling and your work, I guess, looking at conditioning of cyclists within the Tour de France. It's obviously a sport that has had and probably still has its issues with doping. And obviously you are of the age, and I'm sure Sam Bennett is of the age, where you're growing up watching these races, and Lance Armstrong is a dominant cyclist in the Tour de France. It's impossible to move away from this. How big a concern was that for you before you come into the sport, and how big a concern is it for you right now while still working in the sport?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and it's something I don't shy away from when people ask me, even though it probably is the most asked question that I get. But it's something that if we want to move away from that, we got to discuss it. So it's simple. Yeah, like Sam, I was one of those kids who was on, watching TV, and you watch Lance Armstrong, you watch Jan Ullrich, and you're like, this is incredible. And it does have that historical connection with doping. The way I see it now, and my job as a coach, as a sports scientist who is heavily involved in the physical preparation of riders. And like I said, we've got a guy now sitting fourth on GC in Tour de France, in probably the highest level race in the world. And again, I know Romain quite well, and we work a lot together. And it goes back to the point I said, is that there is gaps, and a lot of those gaps are being filled in now by teams. Teams now have more people who look after, producing better equipment, working with sponsors, working with textiles, skin suits, and improving nutrition. And I understand that people will say, they did nutrition back in Lance's day, and they had fast bikes back in Lance's day, but things have moved on to a whole other level. And from my point of view, me as a coach, as a sports scientist, what motivates me is that how can we push forward human performance? and we can look at things, how people do stuff, and the answer isn't taking this or doing this illegal thing. We can actually do it like this. And once you teach people and you explain to people the hows and the whys, they buy into it, and that's how they progress. So I mean, I coach a lot of guys now who are racing the World Tour, and it's not an issue for me. You know, one or two people have mentioned to me in the past, oh, you know, well, what happens if this happens, or if somebody tests positive, it's going to affect your career as a coach. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother my work, because I see what the riders do, and I see how motivated they are. So it's something that, yeah, like I said, it doesn't. I'm not afraid that somebody's doing something illicit or wrong, and it's trying to. And that's why people like me in the sport, where we can give more information and we can move the whole sport of cycling on and progress it and show that you actually can be successful and you don't have to do X, Y, and Z. That's what it is, because there's no point us just turning it back to it and yeah, cycling is whatever. It's, you know, all the guys take drugs and whatever, but we got to move beyond that and show, and cycling itself has made itself to that. We have to constantly, you know, answer those questions, but it's something that if we want to move on, we gotta answer those questions.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing. Like, I guess one of the issues a lot of people would have is not only the filthy history of the sport at times, but also the sense of omerta that exists in the sport. And it's sort of refreshing to see the likes of Romain Bardet coming out over the last couple of years and kind of calling Chris Froome out a little bit over the TUE saga and saying he shouldn't race while this situation is still up in the air. I think that was what Bardet was saying. And this willingness to actually talk about what has happened, what is happening, that's probably the only way that trust gets restored in the sport.
It is, and that's kind of where something like Romain is. You know, I think everybody now, and especially the new wave of cyclists who are coming through, everybody's on that same wavelength. And you know, if something is happening that's maybe untoward, or guys will call it out and guys will give their opinion on it. And you know, something like Romain is not afraid to give his opinion on certain things, you know, and that's kind of how we progress things forward. And so I notice there's a lot of questions over some riders and some teams and how they do different things, but again, it's our job as people who work in the sport to try and say, well, okay, you don't need to do this. Here's how you can get the same effects by doing it this way. And yeah, it's a tough one, but it's something that I'm, you know, quite motivated to try and keep on doing and show people that it is possible, and you can believe, and you can go and watch Sam Bennett do what he did yesterday and have no skepticism about it. You know, having a healthy skepticism is important, but you know, there shouldn't be 1% of anybody who looks at Sam yesterday and be like, that's just blood, sweat, and tears that's gone into that to get him to where he is.
Stephen, it's been great chatting to you. It's been fascinating stuff. We could probably go on for another while here, but we'll catch up another time, I'm sure. Perhaps maybe if Sam is still in position next week, we'll revisit things. Thanks a million for taking the call.
No problem. Pleasure.